That was the night that all hell broke loose and almost 170 people died. And I remember looking out the window, and this once really busy area was now quiet. And then heard another one of these bangs, and it was like closer, and I was like, that's a gunshot. That's definitely a gunshot. It's either a lone gunman who's going to run out of ammo, or they're looking for hostages type thing. And I was like, what the fuck have I just done? Like, they know where we are now. You could tell from the soundscape that they were going into rooms and they were executing people. They're going into rooms and they're killing people. Right. This is happening. They are going to come through our door. They are going to kill us.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience from around the globe. This is your host, Sid, and welcome back to the Sit Down with Sid podcast, where we bring people together one conversation at a time. Joining us today is Will Pike, a man whose life was irrevocably changed on a November evening in 2008 during the Mumbai Terror Attacks at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. Faced with an impossible choice to survive, Will's journey did not end with the events of that night. In the years since, he has transformed a life altering spinal cord injury into a platform for advocacy, becoming a leading voice for disability rights and a powerful example of human resilience. Disclaimer: before we begin, a brief warning. This episode discusses sensitive and graphic content related to terrorism, survival, and physical trauma. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Will's story is not just a chronicle of a global tragedy. It is a profound exploration of the inner architecture of strength and the wit required to navigate a world that is not always built for everyone. Well, it is a privilege to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I might need to get you to send me that so I can use it again another time. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course. Thank you, first of all, for taking the time and accepting our invite. Um, okay, so to start with, for those in our audience who may be meeting you for the first time,
Yeah.
could you share a bit about how your life or a bit about your life before 2008 and what eventually brought you to Mumbai in India that November?
Yeah, of course. Hello everybody. Um, Thanks for having me, Sid. As I said to you before we started recording, I'm really grateful to be given this platform. It's really nice to be able to connect with different audiences in New York and, as you say, with your audience around the world. So, yeah, and I assume that no one's going to know my story. I'm not famous per se, but you might have caught snippets of it somewhere in the news or even the Lab Bible interview I did last year, which I think is maybe how you found me. So yeah, look, I'm a normal guy. I'm a regular guy. And while the events that I experienced were incredible and global, my life before that was pretty average. I grew up in North London. Um, I'm an Arsenal fan, a bit like your new mayor. And I was working in an advertising production company. This was around about, well, it was obviously prior to 2008. So I was between the ages of 25 and 28. I've been working in this production company. I'd really started formulating a kind of a clear plan for my life of being in this industry. I loved working in that, and I was thinking about being a film director or commercials director, and I love the creative energy that type of industry provides. And So life was kind of cool for me, like I'd just been figuring it out, as I said, Londoner, living, working in London, and my partner and I, who had only been really together maybe for 6 months, a year-ish, not that long. We'd recently moved in together. Um, we decided to go to India. She'd been to India before. She loved it. Um, Goa, I knew of as being a very chilled out place, kind of very cool destination. And so we were like, let's go on holiday there. And it was really as simple as that, you know. One little caveat is that, and I'm not blaming her or anything, although she knew more than me about traveling than I did. And we weren't actually meant to be in India at that time because when we initially booked the tickets, we'd gone up to the airport to fly, and they were like, "You haven't got your visas sorted." So
Oh,
the whole holiday was meant to have been 2 weeks prior. So there's that serendipitous kind of element to it, but it is what it is. So anyway, look, we spent 2 weeks in Goa, really chilled out, lovely beach, um, good hash, um, lots of nice vibes. I played football on the beach with a bunch of kids, and it was just a really, really nice chilled out holiday. And then flying back to London, the flight was via Mumbai.
hmm.
And so we were like, let's treat ourselves to villa luxury, get a five-star hotel. And so we booked one night in the Taj Palace Hotel, and that was the night that all hell broke loose and almost 170 people died. So yeah, that
Wow.
was that was the build up to it. Kind of,
Wow.
and it was just normal, just normal life. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing going on that was sort of sensational or anything about it. And yeah, I think that's part of why the story resonates because like it was just one night in that hotel. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I always believe the creator above us has a plan for all of us. We might
Okay.
not like it, but as you said, you were supposed to be there 2 weeks prior. So, but luckily you're smiling, you're here
Thanks,
with us,
man. I am
and
here. I survived.
and we can see that as a blessing. Okay, now you have lived through a sequence of events most people
Yeah.
can't even fathom. I would
Yeah.
love to give you the floor to walk us through the journey from the first moment of the attack at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel to
Yeah.
that life-altering decision to escape to the wind.
Okay. So we checked into the hotel and we'd already done a little bit of sightseeing. So we knew the sort of basic layout kind of to the surrounding area. The hotel, for people that don't know, is situated sort of on the coastline, right near this kind of tourist destination called the Gate to India. So it's really busy area, right? And we didn't know much about the hotel. We'd done a sort of small tour of it. We'd seen the seven restaurants. It's like this huge institution, this hotel. I mean, it's old building, but with kind of new attachments, kind of very high end. One thing I would say, what was interesting was that when we checked in, they had similar to an airport style scanner for your bags, which I had
Mhm.
never seen in a hotel before. And we joked about it at the time. Like we were like, oh, this is novel. And it's only in retrospect you're kind of piecing together things. You're like, huh, that was there because there was an actual terrorist risk or there was a threat to some element of their security. And how long this scanner had been in place, I don't know. But it was certainly embedded in the culture that, that level of scrutiny and security was in place. So we checked in. We'd done a little bit of sort of sightseeing. I think I bought a shirt from a kind of a nearby shop, and we were getting ready for dinner, and it was probably sort of 6 in the evening. My partner, she was in the in the bathroom, putting on makeup, and from nowhere, I heard this bang. And I didn't know what this bang was. It was like a dead bang. It wasn't like a firework, it wasn't like a car backfiring. And I sort of started going through these kind of process of elimination because I've never heard a gunshot in real life. Like in the UK, guns are not prevalent. You don't hear guns. You just don't. And I play video games and watch movies, but in real life, this sound was sort of different to me. And I remember looking out the window, and this once really busy area was now quiet. There was almost no one there. And then I could see a guy crouching beneath a car, and I was like, this is not right. This is something's weird here. And then heard another one of these bangs, and it was like closer, and I was like, that's a gunshot. That's definitely a gunshot. And basically, these sounds started getting closer and closer and beginning to encroach on our space. And then you're like, this is now coming from within the hotel. You're just piecing together the information. You're like, this is, yeah, this is a bit too close for comfort. But we were curious, and so we exited our room, which was on the third floor of the old part of the building. And with these big old hotels, they've got like internal balconies and whatnot. And we kind of went to the huge staircase, this big square spiral staircase, and we looked down, and you could see what essentially was gun smoke building in the lobby area. And I remember looking up, and across the way was another um, guest. We kind of caught eye contact. We both sort of kind of shook our heads in that, like, this ain't good. And we turned around, he turned around, we went back to our room. And at that point, you're like, hmm, what's going on here? Like, what is the scenario? It's either a lone gunman who's going to run out of ammo, or they're looking for hostages type thing.
Mhm.
And either way, we were like, we just need to stay out of the way. Like, we are in our room. There are a lot of people in this hotel. There's a lot of people for whoever is doing this to focus on, that we just need to stay out of the way. And that was really like our kind of strategy from the moment it kicked off. And within that, obviously your mind's going through processes, and I'll elaborate as I go on. Obviously, you kind of question, but what if, like, there was a cupboard outside? What if we go out into the cupboard? But essentially, we're like, let's lock the doors. Let's put everything we can up against the doors. It's trying to create some sort of blockade, if you like, and let's see what occurs. And I probably got onto the phone to my dad quite soon in, um, and I called him up. And my dad's a dad. My dad's a regular guy. He used to work in advertising, but he's not like a diplomat. He doesn't know what's going on. But I called him up and I was like, Dad, listen, could be in a bit of a pickle here. Uh, we're in a hotel, and I think there may be some sort of terrorist attack taking place potentially. And he was quite calm for what it's worth. And he was like, okay, I'll get back to you. And he did get back, and he was like, yeah, there's a terrorist attack taking place in Mumbai right now. You need to stay low, kind of thing, stay out of the way. And we were like, all right, yeah, that tracks. We'll do that. And the kind of weird things that kind of throw you off for a little, that are to do with trying to kind of reach out for help, but also not trying to draw attention to yourself. Like, I remember one point we turned on the TV, and it kind of like had this kind of satellite connection. You know how hotel TVs are all connected to like a main system, and then we turned it on and we're like, oh shit, if we turn that on, maybe that will indicate something in some lobby, in some, back of house terminal, that will say, oh, there's people in this room. You're like, quick, turn off the TV, type thing like that. And you're like, all right, stay low. We were, you know, I'll, I won't snap to the end, but we were in the room for like 5 or 6 hours before we made our escape. And within this time, it's like there was just like ups and downs of activity, of energy. Like it started off small, right? It started off with the gunfire, single shots. Okay, now it's automatic gunshots. Okay, now there's explosions. All right, now I'm hearing like machine guns over here. Right. Okay, this is kind of hectic. But it was like some sort of soundscape theater. We're in here and it's happening there, but we can't step outside the room. We don't know the hotel layout well enough that we can just go, oh, we'll make a quick exit because you just don't know anything. Like you don't know how many terrorists, how many people there are. I mean, like, how quickly can we get out? All they need to do is spot us once and we're dead. So it's like, right, stay where we are. Go into the bathroom. There's explosions because apparently, the movies tell us that when there's an explosion, you get into the bathtub. That's the safest place to go. All right, we'll do that then. It's like, what would MacGyver do? What would Bruce Willis do? Can we bash away at the panels in the room? Can we get in the walls? Can we circumnavigate the air vent system? Like all that kind of stuff. Because it was like being in an action film. Um, and I'll go through, there was some like, it was like, it's all merged into one sort of set of events, but there were some really key moments that stand out and I'll never forget. Um, One of them was where we're in the bath and we've sort of, endured some explosions and whatnot, and we're kind of there and just, try to just stay calm really. And we were calm, to be honest with you. To our credit, we never really like went panicked or kind of went crazy with the kind of situation. We didn't lose our heads. And we're in the bath and it's kind of been a bit of a lull or something. And there's a phone in the bathroom and it starts ringing. And we're like, okay, what do we do? Let's let that ring out. Okay, don't do anything. Stopped. What was that all about? And it started ringing again. And for some reason, I just reached for it and I answered it. And there was a female voice, and she was like, "Hello, Um, Mr. Pike," or it was my partner's name because she booked the room. Yes. Okay, we just want to tell you that everything's under control. Just stay where you are. And that was like the gist of it. And then it was
Mm.
over. And I hung up the phone and I was like, what the fuck have I just done? Like, they know where we are now. Like, honestly, I was like, why? Why did I do that? Because it didn't feel right. Like, there was something about that call that didn't feel right. And I don't know how long it was between the call and what happened next, but basically, you could tell from the soundscape that they were going into rooms and they were executing people because there was like single gunshots and then a bit of time and then a bit closer, another single gunshot. And you were like, they're going into rooms and they're killing people. And you're like, okay, this is now getting a bit real, isn't it? Um, and so at that point we were like, right, this is happening. They are going to come through our door. They are going to kill us. Like that felt inevitable actually. And at that point, I was like, well, what do we do? So we basically we drew the bath curtain so it looked like there was someone in the bath. We hid behind the bathroom door. I had like a fork in my hand. My girlfriend was just sort of crouching by my knees, and we were just waiting. And they were going to come in through the main door, come into the bathroom, see the curtain, assume we're there, move towards that, and then I was going to appear and stab someone in the neck with a fork. That was the plan. And you're like, oh, the shit plan, but this is all we got. And I don't know how long we waited there. Maybe half an hour, maybe 15 minutes. I don't know, 5 minutes, who knows? But we waited for that scenario to unfold, and that would have been the end, 100%. There's no way we would have survived that. Like, I've played video games. Anyone, fork versus an AK doesn't work. So we waited, and then eventually, like, there was another explosion or something, and it was like, okay, maybe they're not coming. Maybe now we need to worry about the explosion that we just had outside the door. And then at some point, my dad was back on the phone. He said, "Look, you're gonna have to get out because there's a fire. Like the building's on fire. You're in the old part of the building and it's on fire, and that's gonna get you if the terrorists don't," kind of thing. So we've been in the room like it's like 4 or 5 hours. The room was double glazed, sealed, like bay windows, like there was no way out. But we were like, right, we're 60 feet or so up, can't climb down the side of the building. Like it was like a flush kind of frontage. There was no angles to work down. I mean, I'm not a rock climber or anything, but we basically we cut down everything in the room that would make a rope. We cut down the curtains. We found some scissors in the room, like in the little stationery box, cut down the curtains, got the sheets, ripped them up, lengthways, made a rope in the room, did a tug of war in the room to test its strength, tied it to a table, and I picked like it was like a little marble topped, heavy, wrought iron, three-legged thing by the bay window. And I tied it to the table, but I used this table as well to smash the window. So while the explosions were going off, I remember sort of timing it. You're in a Shawshank Redemption where he's trying to get out and he's banging the rock on the pipe in time with the thunder strikes. It was like that. You're waiting for the explosion, like, okay, now throw the table at the window, bounces off, doesn't break it. You're like, "Oh, what?" Do it again, harder, smash the window, clear the glass, sort of take a beat, look around, no help whatsoever around, and we're like, okay, fresh air, that's good. Oh, but what if there's snipers? Like, they could just kill us now. So then it was like we gotta go act fast, really. There's no waiting around here. Like the building's on fire. We don't know what's going on. Threw this rope out the window. It's tied to the table. It's like an old-fashioned building with the sort of the eaves of the windowsill. So you can't even see the bottom of the rope. You're like looking out and you're peering down. You're like, where the fuck is that? How far down is that? And I remember just telling my girlfriend that I loved her, and I was like, right, I'll go first. And sort of climbed out onto this little windowsill ledge, and I could see the rope. It probably didn't reach the bottom. It probably would have, stopped about 10 or 15 feet, but enough to be able to jump if you got down. And I sort of just went for it. And I remember putting all my weight on this rope, and I must have got probably like, I don't know, not even 6 feet from the balcony. And I just felt the knots going, and my brain just did like a million calculations. It was like, this is not good. This is not the good scenario. This is not the one. And it untied and I blacked out. Like my brain was like, you don't need to be here for this. And I kind of, a bit like Alan Rickman in Die Hard, saw myself falling out of Plaza, just like, and I fell. And from there on end, like I'm out. I'm out. I'm gone because I hit the ground and I don't know what's going on. I'm out for the count. My partner, she thinks I'm dead. Um, but from nowhere, somebody sees me fall, and the guy gets me into an ambulance that hadn't been there, which takes me off to Bombay General. And the only surgeon that braved going into hospital that day was a guy called Samir Dalvi, who had trained as a spinal injury surgeon in Stanmore in the UK. And he saved my life. Um, and by virtue of falling, the emergency services, they saw my girlfriend. They saw her in the room, and they were able to get a fire engine with a cherry picker to crane her out. And that was all. The weird thing is, I mean, out of all the, I was in and out of consciousness, like just literally in and out. And every time I came round, I was just sort of shouting her name, because that's all I was worried about. And then at some point, like I saw her in the hospital, and I knew she was safe. And then that was it. I was just like, doof. And I came round probably 24 hours or so later, maybe more. Um, and I was in a hospital bed in Bombay with my arms in plaster casts, metal cage sticking out of my front. But I was alive. Um, and yeah, that was the start of my new life, really. But insane, absolutely insane set of events to be a part of, really. And I'm learning new things about the attacks now, actually. I still don't understand fully the political motivations. I know that there's a whole heap of background stuff and some conspiracy theory stuff around some of the people and the protagonists involved, but the city was in a state of fear and anxiety. I mean, I was in the hospital bed, and there was still all the terrorists bar one had been killed, and he was kind of on the run. So people were in a lot of fear because they'd already targeted, I think, hospital. They targeted a Jewish cafe, targeted two hotels, um, and so people were very afraid. And I was in a state of fear. I was in a state of absolute disorientation because I was on a lot of morphine. I was in a lot of pain. The concept of the spinal injury was a long way away. I was not even sort of aware of where I was at with that. There was so much pain that kind of the whole idea that I needed to be turned to kind of prevent pressure sores or whatever it was, and I needed help turning because the lower part of my body didn't work because I was paralyzed, sort of didn't really compute because there was so much going on. Like I'd already seen my wrist was popping out. I had massive reconstructive surgery, not in India, but just to stabilize it there. My elbow's completely destroyed. So there was so much going on that sort of focusing on something as significant as the spinal injury was not kind of my focus. Do you know what I mean? It was just can I just get through this next minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? Um, and that first 12, 24 hours was very strange. And then my dad flew out and my partner's mum flew out. So we had some familiarity there. My partner was there. She was, staying in a hotel across the street and trying to get support from where she could. I mean, the British consulate were useless. The British Red Cross, they flew over. They were asking my dad what to do. It was like, you're the ones meant to be helping us. You kind of assume that everything kind of will kick into action and there'll be all these things in place, but there aren't, you know. In fact, the people that kick into action the most are people like the press. I experienced something really strange, which was that quite soon after, like probably within the first day or two, I think before my dad had even got there, this journalist from the Times, he showed me his business card. And you're like, oh, okay, you're from the Times. That's quite an established paper. That's quite serious. That's fine. You can talk to me. Was it the Times or the Guardian? It was Times or the Guardian. And so I basically gave him an interview. And then the next day it appeared in this tabloid called the News of the World. And you're like, what just happened? I've just been exploited. Like within 24 hours of surviving a terrorist attack, I'm in pain, I'm in morphine, and this guy has lied to get an interview that he's then sold to the News of the World. You're like, freaking hell, this is the state of play. Um, so yeah, that's chapter one, right? Going through
Man, this
that.
is like this feels heavy just for me when listening, and I cannot even imagine. I mean, uh, to live in fear for, as you said, 5, 6 hours, the whole timeline carried on, and from 6 o'clock, as you said, you were getting ready for dinner,
Yeah,
and then you were in the room locked up for 5, 6 hours, and maybe another few hours before you finally said, you know what, I have to break this bay window, and we have to get, you know. And look at the unfortunate thing, you decided to go first, and here snaps the knot, you know.
yeah.
And I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, as I said, it feels heavy even listening, you know. So I can only imagine. Uh, I actually cannot imagine the suffering and the pain you went through,
But
and
you know
I
what? I said up front, like the thing that where I'm so lucky, right, is that we didn't see anyone. Like we didn't see anyone with a gun. I didn't see anyone get killed. And while what happened to me was tragic and has absolutely changed my life, at first in a very bad way, but it the concept of psychological trauma from seeing something like that really I appreciate that I am very lucky on that front. And actually it really hit home when I was in the hospital bed in India and it may be like 3 or 4 days in or something, and this Canadian guy, whose name I don't know, he appeared in my doorway and he had like the hospital gown on, so I knew he'd been injured in something, and he was really cool. He kind of just had that sort of, uh North Atlantic kind of drawl. He was kind of like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like, "Where were you?" And then he kind of was like, "I was at the Oberoi Hotel, and I was just having dinner with my best friend and his daughter, and I watched them get shot in front of me." And he described them as beautiful people. Like he was so like gentle and matter of fact in his description, but the way he was like, and I watched them die, and they were just such beautiful people, and it just like he left, and it got me because up until that moment, like I was so wrapped up in the pain and that I was experiencing that I kind of hadn't really grasped what it was that I'd been through, and that really, made me weep and cry for just the state of human suffering and the fact that people could inflict that pain on other people so mercilessly. It it really just swept through me. Um, and I couldn't comprehend it, you know. I couldn't square that circle. Um, and you know what? That ties into kind of that kind of the concept of like forgiveness, like in the I remember when I was in hospital in the UK and an Indian radio station, like they called me, this is like 3 months later, they called me up and they were like, um this was in reference to the fact that the final terrorist who'd been caught alive had been convicted and was sent to trial and was going to be killed by a capital punishment, if I'm not mistaken. They called me up while I'm in the spinal unit, completely randomly. You're like, "Hi, Mr. Pike. Listen, today, this is happening. This guy's going to get killed. We just wondered what you thought about this." And I was like, "You bastards," because they wanted that type of, retribution, like quote. And I just said, I'm devastated that this is happening because I knew that. Like the whole scenario was tragic, and to sort of the idea that they wanted me to celebrate the killing of another young man, like, and from what I've learned, the guys that were on the ground, they were like 17, 18, 19. They were kids. They'd been brainwashed. They were being managed in real time by handlers that were basically instructing them on the will of God, and that this is absolutely in line with his thinking, and that they will be rewarded in heaven and all that kind of stuff. And so I've watched clips of this. I've heard the calls. I've heard the doubt in the mind of the people that are doing the acts. So that evil has a food chain, right? It's like, okay, shit, here it is. There's a telephone call. So the idea that one young guy who has been brainwashed is going to get killed and he will be the only person punished for this is it's crazy. And it's just tragic and sad. Um, but yeah, when I was lying in that bed in India and that guy told me that story, it just really really hurt me and like really made me realize that I was part of something huge, but also in hindsight, I was also very very lucky because no one I knew had died in front of me. In fact, no one had died in front of me, and and I have a feeling that anyone who's been through something like that, if you've seen people get killed, those faces sort of don't leave you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm grateful for that, man. I'm grateful, and I think it's part of the reason I've been able to, heal in the way that I've healed and sort of evolve in the way that I've evolved because I haven't been plagued by nightmares, you know. Um, but yeah.
Uh, well, do you want to take a moment and give us a little background about your rehab process? How long were you in India in the hospital? How did you get to UK? How long the whole process take? So before I ask you about other questions that I have for you, but I think it's important for us to understand the process here, the rehab process.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. The whole medicalization aspect sort of overrode everything, right? And again, I think it's one of the reasons why I was able to move on from the act of being involved in a terrorist attack because I was in so much pain and my body was so broken. So in I spent 10 days in the hospital in India where they basically patched me up as best they could. They did a brilliant job on the spinal um, column in terms of stabilizing this. Um, Again, in the moment, I'm not really immersed in what all that means in terms of the long-term implications, but I knew they'd stabilize that. I'd smashed my right arm, so that was in plaster. My wrist was in plaster. My pelvis was being held together by an external metal cage, but I'd also punctured a lung, so they needed to just make sure that that was stabilized before I could fly. There was very little support from the insurance company because the terrorist attack was considered force majeure or act of God, which they don't cover. But we were able to get a flight back to the UK on a passenger plane direct because the first flight they wanted to put me on was not direct, which was insane. And the British government or whoever sent me a doctor to help repatriate me along with the nurse. And I kind of still remember the day of being repatriated because there was still a lot of tension. Like again, they still hadn't caught one of the terrorists, I think. And I remember we were driving from the hospital to the airport, and we were like in a convoy. And at one point, everything went a bit tense. And what happened was like a press car had sort of intercepted the convoy and was doing something shifty. And so everyone was like, what's going on here? I'm just lying there, kind of on a hospital bed, kind of in quite a lot of pain because the journey was not comfortable. Um, but look, we got me on the plane, passenger plane, absolutely bizarre set of circumstances where at the back of the plane they folded down two seats. They then put my hospital sort of trolley bed on top of the seats. So my head was like that far away from the overhead locker. I was so high up.
Oh
It
my
was like
God.
being on stilts. And then they pulled a curtain around this like two row scenario. I mean, it was absolutely comical. I remember being again on morphine. I remember laughing. I remember seeing some passengers and they were like, "What is going on?" And I was like, "I don't know." Um, and I got, painkillers and sleeping tabs and whatnot. And about halfway or 2 or 3 hours into the flight, I woke up to the worst turbulence I've ever experienced, where we've all been on a bumpy plane, right? But this was the plane was dropping out of the sky. Like it was it was going, it was not just a bit of rocking side to side, it was fully going for it. And I remember waking up and being like, this whole structure that I'm on is going to collapse and I'm going to fall and I'm going to die. Um, but I didn't. And the plane eventually comes over London and it sort of banked over the River Thames and I kind of caught a glimpse of it. And you start getting emotional because you finally actually feel safe. And it really wasn't until I landed on that tarmac that I was like, oh, oh, I'm not on edge. Do you know what I mean? This is actually what safety feels like. This is what security feels like. Okay, right, we're back. And look, there was crazy details that where the hospital I was taken to wasn't ready for me. Like they weren't prepped for me. I mean, crazy logistical errors that you just can't quite believe are taking place. Like we've been awake for like 24, 48 hours, traveling from India, whatever it was. And then we get to this hospital in the UK, finally going to be looked after properly. Oh, we haven't got a room for you. And you're like, what? Sorry, do you know who I am? I've just survived a terrorist attack in India. Like, it's all over the news. And I remember we were in the waiting area for almost 10 hours. My dad was going crazy. I had to send him home. Like, it was just that kind of, you cannot believe what is going on. Everyone has got zero, like, straws, zero resilience. Oh my God. And then anyway, end up in the hospital bed finally. Okay. And what I didn't realize was this is good. This was the start of the real journey. Like the terrorist attack, the medicalization. I'd only just scratched the surface of what all this was going to mean. I still didn't know what spinal injury was. I had no idea I was disabled. In my mind, this was all going to be past tense. This was all something that I would be healed. I would, I would be fine. I genuinely didn't know anything about spinal injury. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know that Western medicine can't cure spinal injury. Like there are different ways of classifying spinal injury, and some ways of spinal injuries have the propensity for neurological and motor function repair. Like you classify that as an incomplete injury, but my injury was complete, and a complete spinal injury is one where that's it. Like there's no more learning. There's what you have is a finite amount of information that's going to be transferred. And my spine or column wasn't severed. It was impacted so heavily that the damage was irreparable. And it was a bit, again, I didn't know this at this point because I was in a general ward hospital that was really just focusing on my arms and my pelvis. As far as they were concerned, the spinal injury was like the operation was good. The repairs were solid. They don't need to go back to that. So we're going to focus on your arms. So I spent 2 months in the general unit hospital just having operations on my wrist and pelvis and repeated on my elbow to try and get this steady. I still can't extend it fully, but it's functional. So again, I'm like 2 months into this thing now, and I still haven't really had any conversations around spinal injury and the long-term implications. Then I get transferred to the spinal injury unit where my rehab can really begin. And I remember having a meeting with the consultant you know, um, in February, and it's snowing, and I'm there with my partner and my dad, and I'm there and I'm quite upbeat. I mean, this is who I am, and I'm there and I'm like optimistic, and I'm sort of in there, and she's showing the scans, and she's like, okay, so this is your spinal column. This is what's happened. This is like, all right, okay, so there's some information getting through. Because I had a little bit of movement in my right leg, and I was like, okay, so I've got a bit of movement in my right leg. If that comes through, surely more can come through. And she's like, no, you have a complete injury. This is it. And it was like the world was collapsing, because up until that moment, I was, like I said, optimistic. This is going to be fine. We're going to work our way through this. This is going to be a great dinner time conversation in a few years. Da 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 da. But it was like she took the pin, she burst my bubble of ignorance and optimism, and it just went poof. And everything just sort of descended. And that was like the emotional ground zero, because everything up until then had been sort of wrapped up in morphine and, like I said, ignorance and optimism. And you're like, that's fine. But now we're in the realms of reality. And I remember just saying, look, actually, can we just take a moment? And I just kind of put an end to the consultation. And I just went outside and I just started crying. And to be honest with you, for the next 6 months, while I was in spinal unit, I measured my progress on how often I cried. It was like, oh, I only cried 3 times today type thing. That's better than yesterday, because it was just, it's tragedy, because your life is over. In your mind, for me, who somebody had no concept of spinal injury, no understanding of disability, I was a very irreverent person, quite physical, quite playful, like. And just suddenly my mind was just playing all these scenarios. You're never going to be able to teach your kids how to ride a bike. I don't have kids. Like, you're never going to be able to teach how to swim. You're never going to be playing football again. You're never going to do this. You're never going to do that. Da, 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 da. And you're like, they're sort of fictional, but they're poignant, and it's representative of the stigma that you have about this scenario, which is that this is shit. This is bad. Nothing comes from this. Nothing good comes from this. And it was like, it was a really, really tough time. But you get an idea of who I am, right? And I was lucky again, because when I was in that spinal unit, I was in a bay of four of us, right? And the three other chaps that I was in with were all younger than me, and they all had higher up spinal injuries. They were all tetraplegic. So spinal injury occurs at any level of the spine, from like C1 down to kind of like T12. My injury is T10, T12, which is waist level. Spinal injury affects everything in below from point of injury. So the higher up neck injury you are, it affects everything below that point. So arms, dexterity, breathing, balance, core strength. It invariably it will affect everybody's bladder and bowels and sexual function. For me, it affects, my legs and my feet. I don't have any mobility below the waist. In fact, what I was going to do, because I'm always wary of this, when I do a video or a webinar, and anyone sees is this, right? Just another bloody white guy. But like, let me just do this quickly. That's my
Yes.
wheelchair. That's
Fire.
that's 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 my mobility aid. And you know what? It's not a prison. I'm not bound by my wheelchair. It's a liberation device. So while you would get in a wheelchair and you would be frustrated, for me, it's an absolute liberator. And it's a huge part of my identity. So it is important for me that whenever I do anything like this, and it's why I like doing stuff in person, because it means you can see me, in all my disabled glory, being the same confident person, but in a wheelchair, which I think is really important for representation of disability in general. because once I come to terms with my own negative stigma around the fact that disability was bad, you realize that once you learn how to manage your disability, and you can absorb it and you can live your life. Like you can do stuff. But going back to just the hospital bay, so I'm in the bay with three other guys. They've all got high up neck and injuries. And one of my good friends from there now is a guy called David Holmes. And he won't mind me telling the story, but he was Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe's stunt double in all the Harry Potter films. His whole life was governed by his physicality. I mean, this guy was like a human bouncy ball. I've seen his show; it was incredible. Like he could have been a professional gymnast if he didn't like, like alcohol and fun so much. But being a professional stuntman is a cool job. It's cool. Like this, from what I've learned, if you want to go and hang around with the fun people on a film set, you go and hang around with the stunt crew. These people are nuts, but they are seriously nuts. And his whole life, like everything that he was about, was taken from him when he was injured, you know? And so I'm there and I'm in the bed and I'm like, huh, with my waist level spinal injury, and they're all there with their neck level injuries. And I'm like, huh. So even now, it could be worse. And you get perspective, right? It's not about constantly kind of framing yourself in better and worse, but you can get perspective from other people's scenarios. And it can be a motivator, it can be a way of kind of pulling yourself out of self-pity. Um, if he can be self-deprecating, if he can have a smile on his face when he's talking to the physios and the occupational therapist, then sure as fuck I can too. And I can approach this with humility and I can approach this in a way that makes it easy for the people around me. And I realized quite early on actually that I had a responsibility, which was that everyone was invested in me, that they worried about me. And so if I wasn't able to put on a brave face, and I'm not just talking about a facade, but genuinely kind of deal with this, then it would make their lives harder. My mum passed away like when I was 20, 25. So she wasn't around for this. Um, but she gave me, a lot of emotional um language, a big emotional vocabulary, if you like. She was she was a real like a person within her community that people would go to and talk to, and so she would come talk to me, and I got a little bit of that from her. And I've got my dad and my bro and my sis, and my family's quite small, but I had a lot of friends as well, and people were visiting me a lot, and you realize it was on me to deal with this, you know, kind of not fake it, not kind of fake smile. Like people were getting raw emotions, but like, all right, let's move forward, let's progress. And the problem with my situation was that because of my arm damage, I wasn't able to do any weight bearing, so everything just was slow. Like I couldn't do the full rehabilitation stuff. It took ages, and I was in hospital for longer than I needed to be. Um, and the whole thing about spinal injury is that it's very nuanced. Like to who you are. Like there is a lot of broad themes as I discussed with like you have to, but it infantilizes you, it emasculates you, it kind of turns you into a child. Like what you're telling me that as a grown adult I've got to learn how to have a shit again, or learn how to, you know, have a pee, or like what? And it's embarrassing and it's messy, and like you wake up and the bed is stained, and you have people who have to help you do all these things in the morning, and you're naked and your body is depleted, and it's like all the muscles atrophied, and you start kind of looking different, and you're fragile. And I mean, I've been in a hospital bed like lying down for 2 months, and I was so weak, and I just wasn't used to that. I'd spent 1 day in hospital before this. Like I broke my wrist like snowboarding like on a school trip when I was 17. That was it. Like that was it. Like I'd never experienced anything like this. And I didn't know anyone who had. There's no like handbook. Oh, you've gone through this. Now this is what you can expect. Um, and so existentially you are kind of having to reframe yourself, but you don't even know it at the time. And everything is wrapped up in this sort of humiliation, embarrassment, and shame. And you're kind of like, oh, I managed to have a crap by myself this morning. Great. But actually, that's quite a significant milestone. Like, it's important because if you can't do these things, if you can't manage your bowels or your bladder, you won't survive. Like, the reason why people died probably back in the day with spinal injury wasn't because it's probably because they got a UTI. It's probably because they got impacted bowels. So these are like the fundamental systems that we take for granted as adults, and rightly so. Like, but when you have to reanalyze how your body functions and what it is to be alive, it's like food goes in, food comes out. And if you don't take care of that, check out. So you have to deal with it. And I told you I do peer supporting now, like with a charity that supports spinal injured people, and you've got to have these conversations with them. You've got to ask them, how are you finding your bowel management routine? How are you finding using a catheter? I remember when I was in the hospital bed in UCH, like before I went to the spinal injury unit, and they tried to educate me on catheterization. I was not having it because I wasn't emotionally prepped. I wasn't ready for this to be my life. I was like, sorry, what? You can do this. I don't want to know how to do this because this isn't going to be my life. I'm going to move on from this. But then it was like, oh, actually, this is going to be your life. You are going to have to use a catheter for the rest of your life. Whoa. Like, that's seismic in terms of the identity of a kind of a young man who, considers himself, physically fit and sporty or whatever. Um, and so I was, like really in a broken state, but surrounded by guys who were dealing with stuff that was harder. And also, Dave, to his credit, he elevated the whole experience. Like our time on that ward was mythical in the lore of the spinal unit because he would get the whole entire film set over for dinner. Like Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert, what's his chops? Like stuntmen would come by, do magic shows. Like we would get lunch delivered by the studio every day. I mean, everyone knows how crap hospital food is. We would get a menu and be like, should I get the lamb burger or should I get the chicken Like what? He would get this hamper sent to our bay. I mean, it was transformative. And so we're going through this really tough time. Everyone's crying, everyone's shit in the bed, but we're all doing it with a kind of smile on our face and with camaraderie and like this sense of like we're going to pull through together. We're going to do dance routines with our wheelchairs. And so we did. We went through it together. And then eventually you go, man, I need to get out of here. I got to get out of hospital. I'm like 8 months in hospital. I'm like, I got to get out. And you reach a point where the rehabilitation sort of plateaus. You've learned pretty much all there is to learn, and you just need to go out into the real world. You need to fly the nest. Um, yeah, and so I did. I finally got released into the wild. Um, and that's, you know what, existentially, that's where you're really challenged because suddenly I'm no longer an injured person on a medical unit. I'm a disabled guy in a wheelchair on the street, and I can see my reflection and I can see my shadow, and that's me now. And it's like, whoa, okay, let me go on this journey. Um, but again, I was supported by, my family, my friends, my partner at the time. And that first year was all right, you know, kind of managed to socialize, managed to enjoy myself, sort of, um, and managed to kind of just start figuring stuff out, like it's like I said, there's no handbook for this. There are resources. It has changed a lot in the 20 years. I mean, there's way more um, content creators now exposing the realities of life with spinal injury, which is fantastic. Um, but once you're home, you're like, oh, I'm the only one who's doing this now because everybody else, is able-bodied or whatnot, and you're like, huh. Um, and you realize that you have to be the master of this situation. It's you can't rely on your consultant or your nursing team or whatever. It's like you've got to be the in control here. And so, but what the thing about it is that once you underpin the sort of the fundamental systems like the bladder, like the bowels, like getting washed, getting dressed, getting in your chair. It's like once you're there, you're like, okay, I'm ready for the day. I can do this. Like I didn't land on my head. I'm a creative guy. All right, what am I about? You know, I can't visualize being the director or that type of person anymore because in my mind that was a very active, physically demanding role. I was like, all right, park that ambition for the moment. What can I do? I was like, I'm still ideas kind of guy. I like writing. Um, so I was like, all right, let me try something along those lines. And so I managed to get a job as a junior copywriter at an advertising agency. And to be fair, the ad world, the kind of the industry, the people around me really pulled together and supported me because some kind of weird truth started emerging. Like I remember joking when I was in the hospital bed, oh, at least being a part of a terrorist attack, oh, at least I'll get some compensation or something. There'll be some money in this, surely. Nope. Nope. Insurance company, nope. Criminal injuries compensation scheme in the UK? Nope. That doesn't extend. Is there a compensation scheme in India? Nope. And I like you're like, wait a what? So there's nothing? There's no support financial package to help me with this? Like the British Red Cross, like they had like some emergency relief funds, like 10 grand. You're like, that's gone. 10 grand gone. The place where I was working, the production company, they did a fundraiser, which was amazing. I mean, I lost my job in the hospital bed because straight away we realized that the building was completely inaccessible. So before I'd even embarked on my journey as like a disability advocate and activist, I was facing barriers. Um, but that was not realizing that we were sort of in a bit of a financial and compensation loophole was a really strange scenario to be in. And what occurred, and I think this is where, I realized I'm lucky that while I was unlucky to sustain a spinal injury, my story is part of so many other bigger stories that have helped me to kind of, I guess, elevate myself and sort of feel as if I'm part of something bigger. And one of those things was that I wasn't the only person who had been a victim of terrorism overseas. There were people who'd lost family members in Bali and Sharm el Sheikh, um, in Egypt, I think, and they've been campaigning for years in the UK that there was a loop, there was a sort of a negative loop in the criminal injuries compensation scheme whereby if you were a foreign national in the UK and you get caught up in a terrorist attack here, we would compensate you out of our scheme. You could then go back to your country. If you're in a first world country and they had a scheme as well, you could claim double. But if a UK national was in a sort of, third world country or a developing nation without these schemes in place, then there was nothing available. So all these people been campaigning for many years to plug up this loophole. And the compensation scheme wasn't huge sums, but it was like capped at £500,000. But so they've been campaigning for years and years and years, and then I come along, like this white middle class male. Oh, and he's in a wheelchair. Okay, visually the optics on this are quite compelling, and my dad, he's articulate, he's intelligent. He had some friends, one of which was a journalist. She was able to write a story, and we started lobbying. We started campaigning. Like before I was even out of hospital, we were doing interviews, and I sort of slipped into this kind of campaignery type media focus personality for this particular issue. And at the time, it was a Labour government, and we'd done some really good lobbying, and they had ostensibly agreed that this was a loophole that needed fixing, and that there were people who were in need of financial support. That this was really just a kind of an oversight. And then, boom, general election, Tories get in, we had to start again. And that was incredibly draining for all involved. Not least of all my dad, who experienced, just the nonsense of bureaucracy and that kind of political gamesmanship. But again, to both our credits, like we succeeded and we actually did change the law, like straight away, like within, well, I say straight away, God, it probably wasn't until 2012. So it's like 3 or 4 years later, right? So in that time, 3 or 4 years, like I've had to come to terms with disability, realize that there's no financial support available, get back into work, and but simultaneously campaign to change this law, and we did it. And we did get some compensation, but like I said, it had already been capped at 500,000 because it was terrorism abroad. They cut it in half, so now it's capped to 250. But because my spinal injury wasn't like the worst possible case, it was like, oh, you're already eligible for 175, or I don't know what else, something along those lines. You're like, what? Like a lifetime amount of money that would actually benefit me is way, way more than that. But you're going to cap it again? Okay, fine, whatever. But listen, I'm not ungrateful. Like that money was incredibly important, and actually, in terms of the advocacy work and the campaigning work I do now around disability consultancy, I talk about how broad disability is, and it really is. I mean, like so many different lived experiences, but especially in the UK, there are two categories. You either have financial resources or you don't. And if you have a disability in this country and you are dependent on the welfare state and benefits, and you don't get compensated because guess what? You weren't in a terrorist attack, or you weren't on a motorcycle that was insured or whatever, your life is tough. It really is. The cost of living with a disability in this country is, I think they've averaged it out at over £1,000 extra a month. And that isn't to say that it's like every day I'm drip feeding extra money, but a new wheelchair costs like 4 grand. It's like legally, or not legally, but medically it's recommended that you replace that kind of every few years. If I want to get a power unit, that's another 4 grand. If I want to book a hotel room or something, you've got to get an accessible one or whatnot. There's all these layers to it where you're like, oh right, didn't realize I was financially planning for that, but okay. So it really is it's a huge divider, that socioeconomic status. And when I'm peer supporting people who got a new spinal injury, and they don't have enough money to adapt their house, where do they go? What do they do? And people get discharged to like old people's homes or dementia clinics. So you've gone through a spinal injury, you can't afford to adapt your house that you've been living in maybe for years, or you rent through a mean landlord. Oh, and now you've got to go and sort of stay in this holding pen with people with dementia or have lost their minds, or but you're like 27 years old and you've broken your back. Like some of the systems at play are nefarious and deeply unsympathetic. And yeah, to be a part of something that was bigger than myself and to have to campaign and change laws and do all that. Like honestly, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I was able to be a part of something that's bigger than myself and that my particular scenario afforded me those opportunities because whilst I didn't necessarily appreciate having to campaign for money that would have quite benefited me straight away, actually, I'm really proud of what we went through. I'm really proud of my dad. I'm really proud of myself. And it's actually enabled me to kind of like create some sort of legacy, if that's even a thing. Like, I don't even know how much I value that. Maybe in a few more years I'll value that. But just to be able to do stuff that could help other people, that's kind of cool, you know? Like I think intersectionally, like I said, like I'm white, I'm a male, I was able-bodied, like kind of middle class-ish. Like the concept of barriers or the concept of not belonging, I didn't really resonate. But now I'm part of a demographic that is massively marginalized by society and it intersects with lots of different people, which means I can connect with people that maybe wouldn't have connected with me in the past. You know, with all my good intentions, they would have been like, I don't need to waste my time on you, boy. Like, but actually, visually, my situation is quite visceral now. Like, I can be in the supermarket and there's this little old lady, and she'll be like, do you want some help? You know what I mean? Like, I'm the one that's meant to be helping you. And she's there. And she, oh, do you want some help with that? Do you want me to get her tea bags down for you? And I'll be like, yeah, yeah, thank you. And so like there's a real strength and beauty in that vulnerability that once you kind of overcome the kind of, you know, the ego or the kind of existential shift, you go, huh, all right, Granny, let's go. Me and you. Let's have some let's go and have a chat. And like it honestly, it's nice to be able to connect with people that I don't think I would have been able to connect with before. And of course, like I'm not I'm not wishing spinal injury on anyone, but actually I think there's a kind of a hubris that maybe I possessed that has taken a back step just in terms of going, there's more to life. You know, there's many different ways to live. And there's you know the people you can connect with will surprise you type thing. And if I don't take something positive from there, I'm missing a trick, to be honest with you. Like it's all about human connections, as you can attest to with your podcast, right?
No, absolutely. Listen, I am so like deep dived in your conversation, and I admire and appreciate the smile you have today, the way you look at life, in spite of all the challenges you have faced. It's some people might overcome it like yourself, and some might not, and you chose the brighter path, through the adversaries. And uh, 18 years later, you're still here sharing your stories. Uh, as I said, you have spent years sharing your story like ours today. My question follow up to that is, how do you ensure your identity stays rooted in who you are today rather than being defined solely by what happened in 2008?
I don't know that if it does. I think that I have become defined by that, in that, and it's interesting to like, I imagine like sometimes I'm like, what, where would Mumbai sit with me if I wasn't disabled? Like, it really would be in the past. But because of my disability, I can't ever, that's always in the moment. And so it's what's the word I'm looking for? Inexplicably linked um, to that. And so I'm constantly reminded of it. Um, but like I think for people who knew me before and people that know me after, they're like, you haven't changed. Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of the tone of character, the tone of who I am, like my I don't know, um my mindset or whatever it is, like that hasn't changed. But I've had to evolve as a person. And actually I've been able to leverage the lived experience of disability to kind of forge that identity, not just kind of accept it, but like lean into it. Do you know what I mean? Like a hold on a minute. Like this is important. Um, and the work I do now and the reason why like I agreed to do things like this, not just because I enjoy conversations with cool people and from New York, but is because there's a platform for disability that I think is necessary. And so whilst the terrorist attack is sensationalist and the story is, oh my God, the reality is we need to talk about disability. We need to talk about creating equitable solutions for the breadth of disability. We need to talk about universal design. We need to talk about concessions, reasonable adjustments, all these things that, developed nations should be doing de facto. London and UK is very frustrating for me because, we have it enshrined in law that you can't discriminate against disabled people. But the interpretation and implementation of those laws is kind of vague, you know, and it doesn't really hold anyone to account beyond extreme examples. Like, of course, there was discrimination, but if I go down my high street and every month a new shop opens up and it opens with the same stepped entry, and I'm like going, who's responsible for this? Like, who is responsible for saying every new shop must have level access? Standard. Standard. Forget these portable ramps, forget bells, forget waiting out in the rain, knocking on the door, trying to get someone's attention. Forget that. Let's have standardized universal access, universal design, jolly good. And no one is taking ownership of this. From a local level to a national level, disability has sort of been shunted off the agenda. And whilst things like DEI are big topics of conversation, everyone wants, to shit on diversity, equality, and inclusion. For me, it's frustrating that DEI actually hasn't succeeded in propelling disability up because I'm all for, removing bigotry, removing racism, removing homophobia. Of course, let's evolve ourselves. Of course, let's do that. But what you're talking about there is sort of like mindset shifts. you know, remove a person, remove the racist from the office, and you no longer have a racist office. I know it's deeper than that. Of course, systemic racism, of course, institutional cultures still manifest. But in the interim, let's get rid of the dickheads. For disability, you need to completely reinvest in the environment, whether it's the physical world or the digital space. Like, you need to go, oh, you can't just be like, we are now a disability friendly office. Are you? Which disability? Show me. Okay, so you got a stepped entry. Okay, you haven't got disabled toilets. Okay, you haven't got a lift. Okay, you haven't got your internal communications and all your digital tools aren't readable for screen readers or for visually impaired people. So suddenly there's like this huge checklist, and it's like, well, who do we prioritize? And how much do we spend? Oh, we rent this building. We're not paying for that. Like, and you're like, oh my God, this is everywhere. Like, and so you realize you're like, huh, my struggle now is universal. It's bigger than me. And so similarly to like the compensation thing where I was like, oh, I'm a part of something bigger. And I was like, I realized the same with disability. And then in 2016, we there was, I think it was the Paralympics, I can't remember which one, Rio maybe. Channel 4 is a broadcaster in the UK that do a lot of great work around disability. They've really been fantastic protagonists and advocates for disability post. the London Olympic Games, and so they had their new campaign for the Paralympics, and the whole thing was like along this backing track called Yes I Can, this big brass band. And so the whole thing was this guy like wheeling along, Yes I can. And the advert finished. I was like, no, I fucking can't. I was like, I can't. I like the idea, but I can't because there's too many barriers everywhere. So you're like, all right, let me cultivate this message. Not no, I fucking can't, but yes, I can if you create reasonable adjustments, if you create access tools, then I can participate. And then I've off the back of that, I used my sort of background in film production and advertising to put together this film. I had some great friends that were able to come together and we shot this thing and made this little film, and it was better than I ever imagined it would be, and sort of released it into the wild, and it went kind of viral in its own little way. Not huge, not crazy numbers, but it caused a splash, certainly within the disabled community. And the next thing, I'm on like TV shows talking about disability. I'd gone from talking about terrorism to now I'm talking about access, and I was like, okay, I can do this, you know. And that's the journey that I've been on since then, really. That's owning disability, leveraging my experience, trying to campaign for better access. I've grown my own consultancy called the Disability Task Force, which is a group of people with different disabilities so that they can all provide insights based on their lived experience because I can't talk about what it's like to be blind or deaf, but I'm very good at getting us through the front door type thing. So I've grown this really nice team of consultants and we do stuff. And it's still, you know what, it's still kind of early days. And to be honest with you, I need to get in touch with some of them because I got them on board and like, they're like, what are we going to do now? So no, we've got a few good clients and it's really interesting to be able to add value to that conversation because what I realize is that everyone I talk to who's able-bodied was just like me before my spinal injury. They didn't know. They just don't know. They don't know. They have good intentions. They know disability is important, but they just don't know where to focus their resources. So it's really like, what's the word? Good, nourishing, really beneficial for me to be able to go, you know what, I can do something here. And it's kind of given me a bit of different purpose in life. Everyone's sort of seeking something, aren't they? Um, but I don't have to look very hard. Like I know people that are disillusioned, all sorts. I mean, it's a very difficult time to be alive, and if you watch the news, you can be really caught up in things. And people, I think post COVID, there's a lot of separation, a lot of isolation, and a lot of sort of like, what is all this for type thing. And I get it because if you're like me in terms of your demographic or your intersectional kind of attributes, and you're like, where's my purpose? Where's the thing I lean into? And actually, if there isn't something glaringly obvious, you have to find it. You have to look for that thing. It's like adopting a child. You have to find something to care for and love, right? And when you get that child, you have to fucking like really be ready for that because it's a commitment. Because if you offer yourself to people who have been fighting the long fight and you don't follow up with action, they're just going to be just like, just go away. It's not wasting my time, you know? It's attritional. So again, I consider myself fortunate that like I get to add value to a global dialogue around disability inclusion, um, that I think is super, super important. I mean, what is it? 25% of the world's population registered with disability, like 1.3 billion. In the UK, it's like 16 million. Again, 20%. And again, this is a broad definition of disability. We're not talking about 16 million people in wheelchairs, but it's 16 million people whose lived experience does not fit the status quo and they are not represented in the media or in life beyond some bare level requirements. Oh yeah, no, we got a disabled toilet. Oh yeah, no, we got a ramp. It's like, what else have you got? What if me and my buddy wants to sit next to each other in the cinema and we both got wheelchairs? Oh no, we can't do that. You realize that the provisions for disability are bare minimum. Like try flying as a disabled person. Try booking a flight. It is a joke. Like it is a joke. Like you think, oh yeah, 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 okay. Yeah, sure, you book a wheelchair space. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You just tell them you got your wheelchair. Yeah, yeah. It's the system is so outdated, they're almost surprised. It's like, why does a disabled person go on holiday? Like I don't even see that many wheelchair users. When the reason why you don't is because the systems are so crap that they make you feel undignified. They are embarrassing. I've got photos of me being transferred from plane to chair that are like dehumanizing. It is a joke. And so you've got people now campaigning for like rights on flights because the whole industry is backwards. And it's like, where are the bottlenecks then? Well, it's that. It's things like that. And you're like, right. So it's not just about kind of representation of disability in the media, it's the entire global infrastructure needs changing. And you'll meet people to be like, yeah, but we'll fix disability. Like in the future, there won't be disabled people. It's like, well, which future is that, bro? How long are we gonna have to wait? Tell me how long I'm going to have to just talk to my brethren in the wheelchairs. How long we're going to have to wait for your cyborg future in which we're all fitted with exoskeletons and drones that enable us just to fly around and not experience our disability, or where someone finally plugs enough stem cells into the spinal column and it regenerates a new spinal column. Like, well, how long do I wait for that versus maybe just incorporate universal design into your thinking? Do you know what I mean? So
Well, in the
it's
United States, it's very different. It's
yeah.
maybe this is the case in UK, but United States is not that backward when it comes to disability and the kind of advantages, accessibility for disabled people
Mm,
is absolutely to the best. I've been living here for 20 years now, and I can say some of those things that you mentioned
yeah.
about being in United States or about United States. Now, outside the United States, totally a possibility. It also depends on the country's infrastructure, country's economy, because once again, you're trying to change the entire global ecosystem. For example, as you said, it costs a lot of capital.
That's a
Infrastructure
lot of
costs
money.
capital,
That's
you
what I
know,
said. Yeah,
and not every country has that kind of budget in
true.
their lot to kind of allocate funds. Uh,
But
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 I
but the
can,
funny thing it is, if
Mhm.
you dial it back, the reason why the United States is where it's at is because of activists many years ago who campaigned for it's because it's the ADA out there, isn't it?
Yeah,
And when I went to New York 3 years ago, 2 3 years ago, we saw this. We saw that every single shop has some sort of indicator about
yes,
access. So it is very public facing. Um, and I think the concept of wheelchairs and mobility devices is not foreign for Americans at all. I agree. I agree. And it goes to show that if you do embed a political mandate into infrastructure, things do change and the barriers are reduced, the pain points are reduced, and disabled people can participate. It's not rocket science, but I think where it falls short, so the UK, which is where I'm focused on, obviously, is we're a developed nation. We have the understanding that disability needs to be thought about, but we're missing the political mandate, and it's kind of been swallowed up in global, affairs and whatnot and things, and it comes down to priorities. It's amazing. It's amazing when you
I
put people
agree.
on the spot, when you put people on the spot about it. And I had a conversation 3 days ago with a guy who runs a country house in the east of England. Some friends of mine have booked this place for a friend's stag do. It's going to be like 12, 15 of them, some nice eating, whatnot. And they asked me ages ago, would I like to be there? Would I like to come? And I was like, yeah, that looks great. But I knew I was like, I'm going to have to do my own research on them. So I called up the guy. I called up the country estate yesterday. Hi there. Yeah, I'm looking to come in April with some friends. They've booked it. Just want to check that you've got a disabled room and washing facilities and wet room. No, no, we don't have that. And he proceeded to justify why he hadn't done it, even telling me that when they first bought the place, his elderly mum, who was ill, needed a bathroom downstairs and they sort of converted something for her. But then after she moved on or whatever, they kind of changed it back. And I was like, okay. And he said it's a listed building, so we can't put in things like lifts. And I said, you can. It's just a matter of priorities. Like if you want to put in your nice new shiny kitchen or your cinema room or your billiards room or whatever it is that you consider to be aspirational, guess what? You find a way to do that. But when it comes to disability access, it's seen as an unnecessary cost. And the flip side of that is that it's not an unnecessary cost because there is a return on investment. There is such a thing as the purple pound, which taps into the global sort of tapped into economy of the spending power of people with disabilities. Like it's a lot of money, but they don't understand that. And then you say, but beyond that, like it should just be like a kind of a human right where you're thinking progressively. Because here's something, oh, we haven't had that many inquiries about people with disabilities. Yeah, that's because you have no information on your website about access. So the majority of people aren't even going to bother calling up. I've called up because my friends have already booked this place. And you're now telling me with no shame, no real regret, because the majority of people is, oh no, we don't, no, we can't, no, we do it. You could stay at a hotel nearby if you wanted to. It's like, if what? He doesn't even hear it. So for me, we're actually there's a big gap between the awareness of why we're doing this beyond the investment. And I 100% like get it, like huge financial constraints, but show me your plan of action. This is the work, a lot of the work I do now around businesses, like when they're dipping their toe into disability inclusion, it's like hold your hands up and own it. Just be honest and transparent and communicate this and say, we have done an audit. We have looked into this. We are not happy with where we are in terms of providing services and environments for disabled guests or whatever it is. This is what we're going to do. We've engaged lived experience consultants and we know where we're weak and we're going to do this. And then you roadmap it. And guess what? Disabled people, man, we understand compromise. Like we don't expect the moon on a stick straight away. But if you really want repeat business, tell it to us straight and show me that you thought about my journey. Because if I go to a restaurant and you haven't got a disabled toilet, I get that. I live in London. It's a lot of old buildings. Da, 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 da. But tell me where the nearest one is. Show me that you've thought about it. We don't have a disabled restaurant, but we have a really good relationship with next door pizzeria. They've got a disabled toilet. They're more than happy for you to go to use it. Great. The burden of responsibility is now lifted from me and a solution has been found. Because it comes down to these bare mechanics. Like, can I get in? Can I go and have a wee? Can I do that? It's just like, and then you're like, oh, okay. And the problem is that it's so wide, like the level of intervention that's required to create an accessible society that you can convince people in terms of hearts and minds, but then you need to really dial down into what it is um, to create tools for inclusion purposes. So there's a lot of work to be done, but honestly, like I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to businesses that have good intent. Um, and I enjoy doing these kind of podcasts as well because it means we get to talk openly about it.
No, no, absolutely. And I really appreciate that. And I can see uh, the sense of urgency in your fight for disability, being an activist, an advocate, how much passion you have because you can relate to it on a personal level. But
Yeah.
also, you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for the other 16 million per se in the UK who have some kind of disability. So it's a global voice. It's a voice, and I'm sure a lot of our audience from Asia and outside the United States, they might they could have the same infrastructure as what you have in UK, and
Yeah.
they will probably also kind of like to join your advocacy, your fight for the global kind of change in the ecosystem. But once
Yeah.
again, uh, all you can do is do your best, fight the fight, and one day someone somewhere will hear that voice, and things will change. But it can take a while. It has taken a lot of
Does
time
take
in
a
the
while.
past, and it could take a lot of while. But uh, well, I am so happy to have you here, and I love how you dissected the segment towards the fight for disability, being an advocate, because I think this is a very important uh, information, especially the details, the minute details you shared, is
Yeah.
something that we all can relate to. So thank you so much, and uh, it's been a blast. If there is anything else you would like to share with our audience as a closing message, please go ahead.
Yes, Sid, just thank you, man. Really, really appreciate it. It's 5 o'clock in the evening here. I don't know what time it is with you. It's in the morning, isn't it? So I love this. It's been a real privilege to be a part of your channel. And I really hope that my story resonates with some of your viewers. And from a disability perspective, I know that that will connect with people in so many different ways. So yeah, I'm just really grateful. The work I do with the Disability Task Force, like we've got a website under the Hobbs Consultancy, so maybe I can share that with you, and you can share my film, and I'll send you some
We have
links.
your website link on the description, so we will also include the Hobbs Consultancy website. So to our audience, the description, the link of Will's websites are in the description below. So please feel free to click on them. And anything else, Will, that you would like us to share on this platform.
No, I don't think so. Maybe no, no, no. That's all good. That's all good. It's all good.
Well, Will, you have given us a lot to think about regarding how we view accessibility and our own inner strength. To our listeners, if this conversation moves you, please subscribe and share this episode to help us spread these vital stories of human spirit across the globe and the fight for disability. We will see you on the next episode. Will Pike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.